Bonjour, bonjour. Here I am again with my 5th report from France. It's a redo from yesterday's because of sound issues. I wanted to update you on what's going on in France and where we're heading. It's a call to action because I think we need to stand up and recognise what is actually happening to us. Here in France, the scam is identical with the dodgy statistics, the dodgy science and the dodgy PCR tests. If you haven't realised by now that this disease is not as deadly as they are making out, there is a very high survival rate and the government are actually suppressing effective treatments. So it's time to wakey and understand what's actually happening. Natural immunity has been outlawed by Hancock, who's actually standing up and telling us that herd immunity is a myth. This is a ridiculous rewriting of science and medical history, and it's very important, and I'm about to tell you why. Here in France, things are very oppressive, as they are across Europe. We are under house arrest 23 hours a day. We can only go 1 kilometre from our house with a written declaration of where we're going and why. The mask wearing is becoming completely unbearable. There are no exceptions here. No visors, no face coverings, no scarves, nothing. It's a mask or nothing. No medical exemptions. And the government are now decreeing that 6-year-olds must start wearing masks. They're even saying that we should start wearing them in our own homes, which is frankly terrifying, especially when you consider how dangerous they actually are. The new restrictions may bring about some pushback from parents and such like for the children wearing masks, but really the resistance here hasn't got going yet. Some doctors and lawyers are starting to get their act together, but they're a bit late to the party, and they are starting to challenge the government on these latest restrictions. Now, we've been told over and over again that there will be no normal until the vaccine, and quite frankly, I am pretty sure that even when we get a vaccine, we won't be going back to normal. And worse than that, as they were in the UK telling us, as we went into lockdown, already they're telling us that these are going to be extended. They may loosen the screws slightly for Christmas to appease everybody, but basically we are going to be locked in until March or April until these vaccines get rolled out. Now, this means no release until the vaccines, and what's concerning me is this document that's come to our attention through Simon Dolan, who's taking the government to court over illegal lockdowns. The document is called Compulsory Vaccination for COVID-19 and Human Rights Law. It's written evidence on the government website. You can find it yourself. All you need to tap in is COV0220. It's written by academics in moral and political philosophy, biomedical ethics, health law and human rights. It's written by Dr. Lisa Forsberg, Dr. Isra Black, Dr. Thomas Douglas and Dr. Jonathan Pugh. This is what it says. Our submission pertains to compulsory COVID-19 vaccination, a requirement on individuals to undergo vaccination as a condition of release from pandemic restrictions on liberty, including on movement and association. Well, the only thing that is putting restrictions on our liberty, including movement and association, is a despotic government. The disease obviously isn't deadly anymore. Nobody's afraid of it. Hardly anybody's dying of it. And all we've got is PCR tests telling us that we've got parts of some kind of SARS-CoV-2 DNA fragments within us, which quite frankly could be residual from colds we had years ago. So this is completely based on fake science. Their analysis establishes two parity arguments. If COVID-19 lockdown measures are compatible with human rights law, then it is arguable that compulsory vaccination is too. Also, the second parity argument is if compulsory medical treatment under mental health law for personal and public protection purposes is compatible with human rights law, then it is arguable that compulsory vaccination is too. Well, this is what I have been banging on about for so long. This is why I did the COVID-19 Truth Tour, because firstly, we're not being told the truth at all about this pandemic, and secondly, if we submit to the mask wearing, which is an infringement on our bodily sovereignty, our human rights, and if we submit to lockdown, we are giving them the keys to the door to compulsory vaccinations. It's a slippery slope. What this treacherous evidence is saying is that you've already got away with it for lockdown. You've already got away with it under the Mental Health Act, and that gives you a parity argument to get away with it for compulsory vaccination. Now, if we are compelled to be vaccinated, we become nothing more than lab rats for the government for whatever medication they dream up next week. This is completely against the Nuremberg Code, and we have to fight it, and it's no point waiting until they decide to bring this in. I'm not saying that they're going to bring it in, but they are commissioning evidence so that they can stand up and use these treacherous academics as an excuse to bring in compulsory vaccination. Now, this is their chief conclusion. Our conclusion is that as and when a vaccine becomes available at scale, the government should give serious consideration to compulsory immunisation as a means of reducing impacts of COVID-19. COVID-19 has hardly impacted our lives. It's the government restrictions that are seriously impacting our lives and causing many more people to die than would have died from the disease. There is an arguable case for the compatibility of compulsory vaccination with human rights law. What they're saying is that the European Convention on Human Rights sets out our rights, but gives every government a get-out clause if they can make up laws which can be proven to be both proportionate and necessary, which is why we have to fight the lockdowns now, and we have to prove to the government that they are being disproportionate and unnecessary. Anybody now can see that this entire pandemic is a total scam. We're being given dodgy statistics. We're not being told the truth. So how can any of these measures be necessary or proportionate? A COVID-19 vaccine promises to be the best means to mitigate the impacts of the pandemic on individuals and society. They then go on to say why people might be reluctant to take the vaccines. Vaccine hesitancy, they call it, is the result of the anti-vaccination movements. Well, are they anti-vaccine, or are they just pro-safety and pro-good science? Uneven demographic distribution of COVID-19 morbidity and mortality risks. Well, yeah, who does this disease actually affect? It turns out now that it's only affecting people who are quite frankly on their way out already, who are so weak that they would not be able to fight off any kind of infection or disease. Or, they say, the mistaken belief that COVID-19 immunity has already been acquired. Is this a mistake? Are there not thousands of doctors now standing up telling us that 30% of us would have latent immunity from previous coronaviruses? Another 30% will have immunity from the recent epidemic phase of the illness, and the rest are children, and there really is a very small vulnerable group. This has been clear from the beginning, but this is becoming more and more obvious to everybody. So they go on to say that in order to minimise restrictions on liberty, thank you very much, it might also include an exclusion for individuals who are willing to lower their infection mitigation measures. Well, can they actually prove? They have not proved that healthy people can infect other people. I don't think they can even prove that sick people can infect other people. So anyway, to mitigate our transmission risk through other means, their examples would be submitting to lockdown and other mitigation measures. What are those other mitigation measures? So what they're saying is the vaccinated will be liberated and the unvaccinated will have to submit to lockdown. What, forever? How is that going to work? How are the unvaccinated going to submit to lockdown? How are they going to keep us in? Are they going to make us wear electronic bracelets? Are they going to do it through technology? Because they can't make me get a mobile phone. Are they going to make us wear little yellow stars on our coats so everybody knows that we're not vaccinated? and not to let us into their premises. Anyway, what they're saying is, are they going to keep us separated and submit to endless tests and some kind of immunity passport so that we are unable to interact with society at large? This is not compatible with human rights, because if you are to submit to vaccinations and if you don't, then you're locked up, that is completely against human rights. That is why we have to fight the masks, fight the lockdowns, and fight this. Now, this is why Simon Dolan's court case is so important, and he was in court last week, and this little nugget came out. The justice questioned whether the legislation's reasonable excuse caveat meant it did not violate human rights. In other words, they were suggesting there were get-outs from the guidelines and the rules for people who could breach regulations and then cite human laws to justify why they had gone to see grandma, for example. What they're basically saying is, we only put out guidelines and rules. If you don't know your human rights and you don't bother to break the legislation and then cite your human rights as your defence, that's your problem. If you don't know your human rights, if you don't know that the law doesn't actually stipulate these things, it's just a guideline, it's just a rule. There's no law to keep you in your house. There is no law to stop you opening your business. And if you're not aware of that, and if you do not exercise your human rights, that's entirely your fault. It's not our fault. We're just going to keep trampling over them and taking them away because you are ignorant. This is what I've been banging on about since the beginning. Know the actual law and know the difference between guidelines and rules. We don't live by rules, we live by laws. Now, as you may have noticed, there is a scrambling of people in the UK right now to understand the common law and know their rights in order to keep their businesses open. Why do they want to keep their businesses open? Is it because they're selfish? Is it because they want to infect everybody? No, it is not. They are fighting for their freedom and your children's freedom, because we cannot go down this slippery slope. Through these lockdowns, we are actually being utterly dispossessed of our independence and our financial independence. Our culture is being destroyed. Those that recognise that are starting to stand up. If you believe the lockdowns are not really affecting you because you can still go to work, or they're not really affecting you because you can just sit at home and take your furlough money, you are utterly wrong. We are all being dispossessed through these lockdowns. Why? Because somebody has to pay for them, and the debt will be piled onto all of us. Now, if you look at the world debt as a whole, which somebody put a nice graphic out, and I shared it on Facebook, you can see that the trillions and trillions and trillions of debt now is bigger than the entire wealth of the world. Think about that. Now, this debt, we're not borrowing anything from anybody. There are creditors who are creating debt and giving you credit so that you spend it into the economy. There's nothing actually behind this debt, so it's fake. What they're doing is blowing up the entire financial system. And what they will have to do in the end is reset. This is the reset. There's a whistleblower came out from Canada who told us that the plan is to have a debt forgiveness program where they will wipe off the debt. They have to, because there isn't the wealth to pay it back. But in exchange for debt relief, you will have to relinquish all of your property.